Good evening. Right now, Metro Police are desperately searching for the person or people responsible for killing a man and a woman.
And I got a male down in the middle street.
Breaking news now, a triple shooting leaves 2 dead.
Never expect for somebody to tell you your loved one was murdered.
This Labor Day will mark 42 years that have haunted the St. Cloud family.
30 years. 30 years this family has waited for answers.
A couple months go by, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you really start to struggle with the idea that the case might not get solved and that somebody might get away with murder.
It's very unfortunate that we have any cold cases at all, and certainly unfortunate that we have as many as we do. And that's why Ryan's work and the work of Project Cold Case is so important.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. It's April 30th.
It's crazy, right?
I know.
Last day of the month.
Last day of the month. We're heading directly into summer heat in Florida here.
It's not even officially summer.
It's not even close.
We're used to it, though,
yeah,
at this point.
We are. Lorena Inclan joining us again. Thanks for coming. Action News Jacks. We try to get you in here once a month or so and kind of bring back a case that you featured on your news station. And I mean, just always trying to raise awareness for these cases. I feel like, not everybody is watching TV at the same time.
Right.
Not everybody's on social media at the same time.
Right.
Not everybody. So we try as many different platforms as we can to get these cases out and information out, and hoping that someone that hasn't seen it yet will see it.
And the nice thing about this Facebook Live that we're doing is that even if you're not tuned in right now as we're live, you can see it later and share it once you get home from work.
Absolutely, and please do watch it. They have those watch parties on Facebook. You can click a little button and interact with people as you watch it. I've done that a few times. But yeah, share this story. Today we're going to be talking about Stephen Wiggins. He was murdered in October 2008. You did a story last year at some point, I believe.
I did. Spoke to his daughter.
Spoke to his daughter, Katie. And in fact, we have that segment. We'll air that segment. We'll show that segment that you did so that everybody can kind of get a grasp of what happened to Stephen. A refresher. And then we'll go into some of the other details. That there's a podcast that has a lot more information from Stephen's daughter Katie, from me, and from Detective Ray Reeves with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, and we can kind of go through some of that stuff after that. So watch this, and then we'll come back and talk some more about it.
On the night of October 6, 2008, the corner of Colonial and Vista Avenues was the backdrop of a violent crime. The victim was Stephen Wiggins, the man Katie Wiggins called Dad.
I came the next day when we heard, and I came and we saw the blood, the shell casings over here.
She was in her early 20s when her world changed. She's still looking for answers nearly a decade later.
My love for him will never die, so I will never give up, ever.
Detective Ray Reeves of JSO agreed to meet with us about the case.
This is one piece, one of the shell casings from the caliber of gun that killed Mr. Wiggins.
Wiggins was at what was then Maddie's Landing Bar, only a few blocks away. Around 11:30 p.m., he was spotted on surveillance video at the drive-through window of this McDonald's.
We've got all of that on video. And he doesn't appear to be in distress at all.
A short time after that, a neighbor called 911 to report hearing gunshots. Minutes later, JSO found his body.
They noticed several gunshot wounds to his torso and his head.
What makes this case even more complicated is that JSO doesn't yet have a motive. Wiggins' body was found right here on the road. His car on the other side of the road, just a few feet away. The driver's side door was wide open and his car was still running. And Wiggins' wallet was still on his body.
It was not carjacking, it wasn't a robbery, and it may have been someone that he at least was familiar with.
But now, thanks to new information, Reeves tells me they found someone who might help.
We were able to develop someone that at the time was someone that needed to be talked to, maybe a person of interest.
DNA taken from the scene is now also being tested with new technology. For Katie, the new developments are welcomed news.
I just want to know what happened.
To this day, she still drives by this area once a week. She's also working on getting her master's degree in mental health counseling. She's months away from graduating, but for her, it's yet another milestone her dad will miss.
I'll also never have that chance to take a photo when I graduate with my master's this year.
Lorena Inclan, CBS 47, Action News Jax.
And if you know anything that can help police solve this or other murders that are unsolved, call Crime Stoppers at 866-845-TIPS.
All right, we're back. That was the segment that you did with Katie, Stephen's daughter.
She's so strong during that interview.
You know, I've known her for a long time, and I want to kind of get into that and tell a little bit of the backstory. But we'll start with you know what you saw there. Just kind of quickly that Stephen Wiggins is at Maddie's Landing Bar over in the Lakeshore area of Jacksonville, Florida, the west side.
Which you saw there, it's still in that area, different
It's
name.
still different name, same, still there. He leaves around 11:30, according to people that were at the bar. At 11:33, and I remember this because I listened to your podcast earlier today, so that was a little more detail in there. 11:33 goes to McDonald's drive-through. They have surveillance of him coming through. He's by himself. He's happy, jovial. Not in any kind of distress, doesn't look upset, not arguing with anybody at McDonald's at 11:33. A very short distance away on his way home.
She didn't live that far from there.
He did not live that far from there. At 11:45 p.m., neighbors call in reports of gunshots. Police respond to the scene. They're looking around, kind of going up and down the streets. They find his car at the intersection of Vista Avenue and Colonial Avenue.
This is near Cassett. To
Near
give you an
Cassett
idea.
Avenue, yeah, on the west side of Jacksonville. There's his car on the side of the road, door open,
Still on.
headlights on, car running, and his body across the street, in a very narrow street. I mean, these are not, you know, it's not like a 3-lane, you know.
And it's residential. There's a bunch of homes
it's
nearby.
all residential. And his house is literally like the street he lives on is like a block away from where this intersection is.
Right.
So he's very clearly on his way home with something to eat. Detective Ray Reeves mentions it in his interview with you that they don't really know what caught his attention, but something at that intersection caught his attention.
Enough for him to leave his car.
Enough for him to stop, pull over, open the door, get out, leave the car running. Like
exactly.
it appeared it wasn't, you know, the car broke down and he got out and walked away. You know, it was nothing. I mean, he it appears got out rather quickly based on just the evidence of the car being left there. So they don't know whether there was some kind of altercation that was going on, some drug deal, somebody that he knew, that was walking by. There's a number of different scenarios, but they've never been able to pinpoint what it was. But something caused him to pull his car over, get out, and then he shot multiple times and left there on the side of the road.
Car open, still running.
Wallet still with
still
them.
there.
No, it wasn't a robbery. Wasn't carjacking.
Right, exactly. The fact that you mentioned that was interesting because if this was a robbery, obviously his car would have been gone, or maybe at the very least his wallet. So it appears that it wasn't. To me, it wasn't random because
it's his neighborhood,
right?
So it's not out of bounds to think that he may have seen somebody he
knew,
recognized or knew. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it wasn't a friend. Maybe it was just somebody he saw around the neighborhood.
Exactly.
Were they in trouble? You don't know. You would hope that they would come forward and say, someone was harassing me and he came to my defense and then ended up dead. You just don't, but those are the unknowns. That's what the family has struggled with all along. Why? He's on his way home. You know, I've known Katie, his daughter, for a long time now, but I've heard lots of stories about him. You know, obviously I never got to meet him myself, but he's always kind of been described as kind of a loud, boisterous.
I was just going to say really outgoing, just not afraid to voice his opinion.
No, very straight shooter, very flirtatious with the ladies, you know, kind of a self-described ladies man, you know, and not the kind of guy, like, always, from my understanding, always the kind of guy that was smiling, laughing, and joking. Maybe sometimes joking a little too much and too far.
Right. And you saw from the pictures how happy he was.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
You know, just always joking around.
Every story I've heard, every picture I've ever seen, that kind of embodies Stephen Wiggins. But we've been told he was fiercely protective of his family and friends and people that he cared about, and that he was not the type of guy that would back down if challenged. He's always kind of been described in the stories I hear. He's not the guy looking for the fight.
Right.
He's always happy-go-lucky. But if somebody approaches him and has a problem, he was not the type of guy to just turn the other cheek and walk away.
Yeah,
he would defend himself. And if he happened to see somebody doing something to somebody he did know, it wouldn't have been out of character for him to be protective.
Right.
You know, again, we just don't know.
I think the neighbors in that area are critical, because this was, so to give you an idea, I don't know from when you saw in the story, but where this happened is like just a few feet away from somebody's front door. It was so close to different homes there, and it's a very residential area. So I think, you know, if anybody's watching the story who lives in that area or used to live in that area and remembers this was in 2008, I think that would be critical, not just what you saw, but what you heard. Maybe you heard an altercation. Maybe you heard somebody yelling, screaming, getting into an argument.
Saw somebody running away after you heard some of that screaming and gunshots or whatever. This was... So October 6th, but into October 7th, like that 11:45 call to 911 about gunshots, they don't actually physically find Stephen Wiggins until after midnight, you know, a few minutes later, after midnight. So it was late at night, you know. I mean, this is a quiet neighborhood.
It's
a very well-kept residential area. Not the kind of place you would think a lot of people would be out on their porch at 11:30 or midnight.
People
you know, they probably were sleeping
or
getting ready for bed. But it's still, obviously people heard gunshots.
For sure.
So some of the I'm trying to figure out the best timeline, whether to talk about Katie first or let's kind of go through it like this. We have some slideshow, some pictures. Since we're sitting here talking about Stephen Wiggins, we'll show you some of these pictures of him. We had some of these that Katie had provided us over the years, and then I knew she wouldn't mind. I went and looked at some of her social media pages and pulled a couple of extra ones that she could, you know, I knew she posts them publicly, and I know she's very proud of her dad, loves him a lot, means a lot to her. His stories is a great point of joy for her. So I know she was okay with us sharing those. But yeah, her on the phone with him on the phone with her. As I've mentioned in these Facebook Lives and with interviews with you in the past, before I started Project Cold Case, I worked for another nonprofit that helped families that had lost loved ones to violent crime. That organization no longer exists, but when it was around and I was there, we would get people calling us that had lost somebody occasionally, or they'd send an email in. And so one day I get this email that is, it's like one or two sentences, and it just says, my dad was killed in 2008. Someone told me I should call you. Here's my number. And
did you usually get messages like that?
No, usually it's much more detailed. They want to tell you the life story and why you should, reach back out to them, and why their case is important and their loved one is important. And this was, and I mentioned a little bit in the podcast with the interview I did with you. I could just tell that this was somebody that was angry, that didn't really feel like anybody else cared.
Right.
And
you're sort of at her wit's end there, just like, let me just see what this guy has to say.
And it was a weird situation where a high school classmate of Katie's had experienced something similar, where her dad was murdered, and I had been helping that person, and they weren't really friends anymore. They had been out of high school for a few years, but they were Facebook friends. And one, the one that referred Katie would kind of see Katie posting things online and could kind of gather something had happened, and neither of them knew each other's story, but it was obvious from their social media posts that they had experienced a loss of a father. They kind of connected privately, and when that happened, that survivor said, Katie, you need to reach out to Ryan at Compassionate Families, and he'll help you. And I think Katie thought, yeah, sure he will. You know what I mean? Like, nobody's helped up to this point. Like, why would this person and this organization be any different? So it was a very short email, and we actually went downstairs with the boss, and we sat down, and at the time Katie was living in Ormond Beach, an hour and a half south of here or whatever, and we said, this is the information we have. We have her name, that she lives in Ormond Beach, and just this 2 sentences or 1 sentence, and the boss was like, our grant doesn't cover Ormond Beach. That's a different county. That's not in our, so, we don't killed in Jacksonville, was able to work with our grant that we had at that time. Good. And she just happened to be living down in Ormond Beach with her boyfriend at the time, but they were actually going to be moving back to Jacksonville, relatively quickly. So that's kind of the start of it, and we were friends to this day. And we're friends. We were able to help her out through kind of a hard time. It was one of those situations where his murder was not highly publicized. There was I don't know if there was any television coverage of it back then, but there was one story on the Times Union newspaper, and it was like a paragraph. And they spelled his name wrong, and that was it. And there was never any follow up. They never asked, the family for any comment. So I really felt that she was bitter and jaded, about how her family had been treated and how her dad had just kind of been swept under the rug, like his life wasn't as important as some of the other cases. And we were able to get her some counseling, get her into some support groups where there were other people like myself and Patty and other survivors that had experienced a similar loss. And she really started to kind of come into her own at that point, and was able to
found her voice.
Yeah, she did. And
she's a great advocate for her dad.
She is. She really is. And she's done a number of things. She volunteered at that organization for a few years. She interned there. She went back to school. She was a corrections officer. She did corrections for a little while. And now she's got her master's degree from UNF, and she is a mental health counselor.
And it was all because of what happened. To her dad. Like, that was she took this journey because of that moment.
Exactly.
Her life completely changed.
It turned her life around. Who knows what she would be doing, where she would be if her dad was still around. Now she's able to help other people. She just opened her own new practice, private, counseling. Called
that's awesome.
Uprooted, I think is what it's called, and her little tagline is where healing is planted. And so she's
that's awesome.
She's very proud of it. She's got a new office. She's got a Facebook page, and she's seeing clients of her own now and trying to help them. And so. That's awesome. It's really good to see that. And so when I started this organization, like, there were families that I knew from previously. Patty in our office obviously was one of them. Katie's was one of them. So her dad, when I started Project Cold Case, I reached out to the people I knew, and I said, look, this is what I'm doing. If you'd like me to feature your loved one's case, send it to me. This is how I'm going to do it. And so Katie's dad is one of the first handful of cases that we featured on our website. It was one that just kind of carried over with me, that is always one of those that's in the back of my head, that whenever technology changes or somebody asks me about a case, I think about hers. And as our relationship as an organization grew with the sheriff's office, it wasn't uncommon for them to ask, about cases that we had experienced and knew a lot about.
Right.
And so I called up one day and I said, this is one of those cases from the very beginning, before I had a relationship with your agency. Can you take a look at it? And kind of going back, when I first met Katie, we'd had meetings with the detective that was on the case at that time. And it was, these are kind of sad things that the people that watch that are survivors can relate to. Katie came into our office. We got to know her a little bit. And this is probably 2011. So, at that point, the case is 3 years old or almost 3 years old. I asked her the status. She says, well, she hasn't heard from the detective. It changed detectives at one point, and she doesn't know the status. And I said, well, after 3 years, there's a good chance it's been suspended. And she said, well, nobody told me if it is. And I said, well, do you want me to call over and find out? And she said, yeah. And I called over and I just asked the simple question: is the Stephen Wiggins case from 2008 active or is it suspended? And they said it's suspended. And nobody had ever sat Katie or the family down and said that they had done that. Now, the policy is to sit the family down and have that discussion with them. But it happens way more than I'd like to see, where that slips through the cracks, or where maybe law enforcement only has one point of contact, and maybe that point of contact's number is changed, or
but that's why it's important to check up with them periodically, just to update their information
and keep your information current. And if they have something
use a
like
resource too.
Absolutely. Once she found that out, that was a blow to her. She finally had somebody caring about the case and willing to help her, and then she finds out that it wasn't even active. So we scheduled a meeting. We went down and we met with the detective. He said, and it was kind of crazy. She actually had information that they didn't know. And she said, as we're sitting there, she says, well, what about the phone call? And they look at her blankly, what phone call? And she said, well, the next day or maybe 2 days after my dad was killed, I got a phone call and she says that it was, the voicemail was just I couldn't understand it, but it sounded like they said he should have just left her alone, or he should have just left out the back door. There was some kind of it was hard to understand. There was no context, but she was sure that it was something about her dad and the murder, and that somebody had tried to give them information. And so they went back and they pulled the phone records, and they sat down with her, and I was there, and they said, highlight each one of these phone numbers that you know. And Katie went through, surprisingly, even at that point, 4 or 5 years later, she was able to say, well, that was my number, that was my mom's number, that was so-and-so's number, that was and only left 3 or 4 numbers that she couldn't identify. And they were going to go back and look at those numbers and try to identify who they belonged to. Ultimately, they weren't able to connect it. I mean, people go through numbers so fast these days. But there was also DNA in this case, you know, and so.
And that's why when you saw the story, you saw at the bottom, it said JSO reopens a 10-year-old cold case. So that was huge at the time. For it to be reopened after 10 years. And
it's always weird when you have DNA and you submit it to the database, CODIS database, and it doesn't come back with a known suspect. So you kind of, in that situation, that DNA is always running to kind of compare it to those to new submissions. So you always think there's a chance that this person's going to get in trouble again.
And nowadays, if it's not in CODIS or whatever the name is of the database, now we have genealogy websites and
it opens
DNA
up
testing.
a lot more resources, a lot more opportunities to solve a case. Absolutely. So one of the one of the behind the scenes stories was when I called and asked them to take a look at this case, this sheriff's office, the cold case unit, to take a look at it. They immediately pulled the file and recognized that there was an individual that had been described by other witnesses as having interaction with Stephen at the bar earlier that night, and
That's another key part of this is, who he talked to at the bar.
Right.
And,
right.
What happened there? Was there sort of discussion?
Exactly. Was there an argument? Was he flirting with the wrong guy's wife or girlfriend or something like that? There had been a description of somebody, and when they initially investigated, they were never able to identify who that witness was. And literally within hours of me calling and asking them to look at it, they identified that witness, and they proceeded to make contact with them and try to interview them and get some more information. My understanding is that it didn't actually lead to anything else. Now, I don't have any insight here, but does that person have more information? They're just not willing to come off of it? Maybe. But what it did was it gave them reason to reopen the case between DNA and new technology, and this witness being identified and interviewed.
It's huge for a case. I mean, sometimes you only get one of those things.
Exactly.
In this case, you have.
And it was 10 years later. And all of a sudden, there's this new step.
It's
so
huge.
I know they are bringing that case up to investigative standards. I think they've brought it up to investigative standards. I think they're kind of at a point now where they still don't have the suspect enough to make an arrest. They're kind of weighing their options. Katie has requested a meeting with the detectives, and we've reached out to them, and we're working with various schedules. Detective Reeves, who was in the cold case unit, and this was his case, has transferred back up to the hot homicide teams. So he's really busy, unfortunately, with fresh murders happening regularly. So trying to get his schedule to align with her schedule, to align with my schedule, to align with the cold case sergeant's schedule has been a little bit difficult, but they have agreed to meet. They've committed to meet. At this point, it really is just a matter of getting everybody scheduled and on the same page.
Yeah. It's really difficult. I can imagine being on the law enforcement side of this, because they must be so overwhelmed. There are thousands of cases, and it's sad to say that thousands of cases just in Jacksonville.
Right.
I mean, not even talking about the rest of the state of Florida. So there's a lot of work to do. Not enough people to do that work.
Right.
And unfortunately, the more time goes by, the colder and colder these cases get, But at the same time, it's sort of an exciting time for cold cases right now because of technology and the genealogy aspect of it. And so many of them are getting solved because of that. So I do hold out hope for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
For the Wiggins case.
And this one, there are some cases that are, 10, 15, 20 years old, even 3 years old, that don't have as much as this one has.
To have this kind of traction, and it's really, it's been, I'm sure for the family, it seems like an eternity. But we talk about cold cases that are 30 years old.
Right.
This one.
And we are on this cusp of genealogy. Imagine 10 years from now what the technology is going to be and what they're going to be able to do. A case like this one really does have the potential to be solved, and I mean we have hope that all of them get solved. But when you look at them logically and you start looking at evidence and what each case has, there are some cases that are going to be harder to solve than others, and they're cold for a reason. They're already hard to solve. This one particularly because whoever's DNA was left at the scene has not shown up anywhere else. Does that mean they're dead? Does it mean that they straightened their life up and haven't gotten in any trouble? Does it? I think listening to the podcast, Ray Reeves said, at this point, was that DNA transferred there at the scene, or was that DNA from earlier in the night? You know what I mean?
There's potential for that too. But either way, whoever that person is could provide a little bit more information. Right.
And that's why you in this podcast, you're asking the detectives, so what is it you need? And they said, this is one of those cases that we need the public's help.
Absolutely. It's critical. And we talk about it all the time, and you might think of us as broken records, but we're broken records for a reason, because it is so important for you. If you know anything, if you used to live there and you remember hearing those gunshots, just call and say, yeah, I remember I heard 3 or 4, and maybe in their file it just says 2.
Right.
You know, so anything like that, it will be extremely valuable. You remember seeing him talking to somebody, the silhouette of a woman, for example, and now we know, okay, no, he was talking to a woman.
Was there 3 people? You know, did you see people running in all different directions? Was there,
absolutely,
you know, did somebody tromps through your yard and stomp on your garden? You know,
exactly.
You know, was there a group of people together, or were there 2 groups that were? You know, I mean, there could be, you know, any number of things that need to be answered.
Absolutely.
And you know, you went to the scene with Katie, and I've been to the scene with her before as well, and she drives by there regularly.
She does, yeah. She's very familiar with that area.
Yeah, this is not. Her dad's murder has not impeded her growth or her success, which is admirable, but it has also not. You know, it's not forgotten.
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's changed the course of her life. I mean, who knows where she'd be today if she had her father there rooting her on, supporting her. Now, you know, unfortunately, he wasn't able to be at her graduation.
No.
And she did everything. Everything she's doing now is because of her dad and what happened to her dad. And you know, I know you can relate with that.
Yeah,
tremendously.
Absolutely. It's one of the bonds. You know, her dad was 56 when he was murdered. My dad was 56 when he was murdered. Her dad was October 2008. My dad was October 2009. Like there were a lot of parallels between our dads and the cases. You know, mainly that they were still unsolved, and so you know, we both had dads that had you know, had kind of been in and out of our lives at certain points for whatever reasons, you know, and we had to, you know, build relationships with them, and we had gotten to a point with our dads that that we were in a very good place. You know, we were kind of, I think we both describe it as the best relationship with our loved one that we had ever had at that moment that they died. I mean, she tells you that she saw him the weekend before or whatever, and
we had a great relationship.
And he was. Yeah, one of the things that she always beams about is how proud he was of her, no matter you know what, and to know that he was proud of her then and what she has accomplished since then, despite his unsolved murder hovering over her head, really is a testament to her and her strength, and to him as a father. And I know her mother. I've met her mother a number of times, and. Her mother's her biggest supporter and cheerleader, and you know, her parents were divorced, but they were actually really close, and still really loved each other. Just, you know, sometimes those relationships don't work, you know, together. They work better apart. But you know, her mom was not the type of person that was bashing, you know, Katie's dad and talking bad
so
about
mature,
him.
right? Because I mean, you don't usually hear about that. So they seem they were a close family.
They were a close family. This is the Stephen Wiggins case, you know, from 2008. Katie has a brother that was also, you know, deeply impacted by this. She and her and her brother have a great relationship. They communicate regularly, but they both grieved very differently and have.
Everybody has a different grieving process.
And you know, it's just one of those tough things when you're trying to grieve how you want, and you know, the people closest to you, the other people that loved your dad as much as you did, are grieving differently. You know, that kind of complexity sometimes makes that journey to heal more difficult. You know,
for the survivors of cold cases, it's very different for those whose cases are going through the justice system. Right, they have a different set of needs.
Right,
which is why it's so important for organizations like Project Cold Case to exist, because a lot of these families just feel lost.
They do.
They don't know where to go, who to ask, you know, help from. It's difficult.
It's very difficult, and you know, there's so many resources out there when a case is solved, when an arrest is made, when
you get an advocate assigned, sometimes a lot by the state attorney's office.
Right, exactly. There's just so much more to it. There's somebody explaining how things go, and when the case is unsolved, you know, there's nobody calling you to check on you, to fill you in on anything. There's nothing, and always in the back of your head is, who did this to my loved one and why?
Yeah.
And are they going to come after me? am I going to be, I've talked to families that have a description of the person that killed their loved one, and they literally say, if I see anybody that looks like that person, I wonder if they're the one that killed, my loved one.
Think about the paranoia that they live with every single day. Aside from the grief that they're dealing with, they're constantly looking over their shoulder, I mean, and some of those fears are real. Others are, sometimes
just perceived,
it's very difficult. So that's why it's so important to have somebody like you, Ryan, who knows exactly how they can help. Having that support group is so important, and publicizing these cases.
It really
is.
That's
the other thing, just putting them out there.
This case. Remember this, that it had a one little paragraph blurb in the newspaper. We never were able to, through Google, find anything. I mean, 2008, we weren't really storing this stuff as well as
it doesn't seem like that long ago, but if you think about it, it is.
Technology-wise,
it has changed.
It's hard to find stories from back then that news stations have kept. Especially if at the time all you had was that there was a murder on Colonial and Vista on this date.
Right.
If you have information, call Crime Stoppers.
Right.
Now
we have a podcast dedicated to this entire case. We have a TV story.
Right.
And we're doing a Facebook Live. I mean, all it takes is we can't forget these victims.
No. Clint did a really good thing. Each week on Friday we post on Facebook all the pictures of the cases that have been submitted to us that week. So some weeks that's 11 or 12, some weeks it's 3 or 4, we never know what it is, but for the first time in months, 6 or 7 months, we didn't have any pictures to post. We had some cases submitted that we either still were in the vetting process or we were waiting to get the actual picture from the family. A lot of times families will submit the case without a picture, and we wait until the picture, we get the picture before we post it. So for the first time in 6 or 7 months, we didn't have an image to show on our weekly, recap of submissions. And Clint came up with the idea to do a little GIF that was the first 100 victims that were submitted to our website that just flipped through, rotated one at a time, every half a second or whatever, it switched to picture. And we did a big post about, we're never going to forget these original ones. We spend a lot of time, talking about some of the ones that come in more recently. They get, that spot every week. We never want any of these victims to be forgotten. It's why we have the Faces of Unsolved Homicide on our website, which has images of every single victim that's ever been submitted to us. It's why we share those things on social media.
People
it's why
need to
we
see
have
visually,
you
need to hear their story too, because it's not enough to just be like, Stephen Wiggins, and that's it. His age and where he lived.
56, died 2008.
Exactly. He was a father. He was he was a friend. He was a brother. A son.
Yeah.
So it's important to show you these are not just names on a list in a file just growing at JSO.
Right.
These are people's lives. And what's even more, unfortunately, there may be a person out there or more than one person out there who thinks that they got away with murder.
Right.
And that should never be acceptable in any world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And think about this, it's 11:30 at night, 11:45 at night, you're getting ready for bed in your house in your nice neighborhood, and somebody thinks that it's okay to just open fire on somebody else outside of your home.
Where your kids play,
Right. And what if, one of those bullets, travels through
that's another thing too.
A window, a door, and strikes somebody inadvertently.
Who had nothing to do
who
with...
was not... That's the type of person that was out there, that felt like it was okay to just pull out a gun and open fire in the middle of a quiet neighborhood in the middle of the night with total disregard for the people that were around. Obviously, total disregard for Stephen Wiggins and his life. But if you're one of those people that thinks murder can't affect me, and you were in one of those houses, it could have very easily affected you by sleeping in your own bed.
Right. That's a great point, because a lot of people say, well, I'm not involved with, the bad crowds and this like that. I'm not saying that this was the case here.
I'm home in my bed at 11 o'clock.
It's like, that's why I shouldn't have to worry about murders and whether that's in another part of town. No. It could be outside of your doorstep, and you can get hit by a stray bullet. You had nothing to do with what's going on, and here you are.
Exactly. And that's why if you have information, it is. It's a public safety issue. It's everybody's problem, and that bullet doesn't have a name on it. It doesn't know where it's going to end up, and somebody that could be that callous and that irresponsible with a weapon. You know, we could one day, you know, be talking about a case where somebody was asleep in their bed at 11 o'clock at night and a bullet comes through. We've had those cases.
It has happened.
Donna Mills, you know, Confederate Point apartment complex is asleep in her bed, and somebody opens fire in the parking lot and comes through her window and kills her in her sleep. You know, that stuff has happened.
Those people need to be off the street.
Right. You just can't.
And we have the power to help JSO and whoever may be watching who knows somebody in that neighborhood or whatever the case may be who was at that bar earlier that night. You have the power to get those people off the street. So why not just pick up the phone and do it?
Yeah. We talk about it every time. Crime Stoppers, 1-866-845-TIPS.
Yep. You can be anonymous.
You can be anonymous. JSO, you can call the cold case office at 630-1157 if you have information. Again, you know, Crime Stoppers there's a reward. There's a $3,000 reward out there for Stephen Wiggins' case. Whether you're anonymous or whether you know are not, if it leads to an arrest. That's not an arrest and conviction, and that doesn't mean, you know, 6 years down the road you'll get a check. If your information leads directly to an arrest, you'll have that $3,000 relatively quickly. I think that board meets monthly and goes through and gives out the reward money for tips that have come in.
And there's a way for you to get that money anonymously as well.
Anonymously,
yeah, it's all they have it down to a T.
They do.
And if you're thinking, well, I don't want to get involved, you know, because a lot of people think that. Here's the thing. Tomorrow, God forbid, it could be you. Would you like it for somebody to say, well, I don't want to get involved?
Right.
That's just, it's not an option. You know?
And this is, you know, we've talked about how relationship changes actually solve more cases than technology.
Right.
So 10 years ago, maybe you didn't want to get involved, maybe because it was your significant other, or maybe it was because it was, you know, I mean, who knows what it was, but your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your husband, your wife, your best friend, and you didn't want to get involved. What's that relationship like now? Do you still talk to that person 10 years later? You know, maybe now's the time to finally come clean, help Katie and her family get the answers they deserve, and also get that off of your chest, you know, and do something right.
And think about the impact you'll have on Katie and, you know, her kids down the road and so on and so forth, because you were brave enough to pick up the phone and give that family some answers that they need.
Right.
You know, and if it's not this case, another one, if you know anything about any cold case, go ahead and just do it. It'll make you feel better.
It will, and it will make our community a safer place. You know, Katie has a niece. Stephen Wiggins had a grandchild. You know that he doesn't get to see, doesn't get to play with. She doesn't get to know her grandfather. So you know, these are real world stories. These are real lives that are affected. And there's somebody out there, hopefully watching this, that can change that and give a family answers and put somebody that has no regard for public safety, you know, force them to face the consequences for their actions and protect our community at the same time.
And if I can just ask anybody who's watching this, everybody who's watching this, to go ahead and just share this.
Yeah.
And even if you don't know anything about this case, you didn't live there, you have no ties, you have no idea, maybe somebody in your network does. So just go ahead and share it. You don't have to say anything. Just hit that share button, and that's it. It's the easiest thing you can do.
It really is. You know, people always ask, you know, I go and give a presentation about Project Cold Case and talk about it, and inevitably somebody raises their hand and say, well, what can we do to help you? And, you know, there's always things people can do for a nonprofit, but there's rarely something that people can do for free that doesn't take them any time, doesn't cost them any money.
That's right.
But liking these, sharing these, helping us that way is huge. And I tell people, you know, we don't need to reach 1 million people. We need to reach one, but we may have to go through 1 million to get to that one. And it's a little bit different than other platforms that are trying to reach, you know, your station is trying to reach as many people as possible. We really are trying to reach one person, one or two people. There's somebody out there that has information on all of these cases, and we're just trying to reach them. And we don't know who we have to go through to get to them. But it's a small world out there, and you go on Facebook and you start seeing who your mutual friends are with people that you've never heard of, what I mean,
exactly.
or you go look at TV personalities and realize you have mutual friends in common.
That's the beauty of social media.
It is the beauty
of
social media. We're connected, and it doesn't take much to reach that person.
And maybe this person, whoever it is, moved out of state, and maybe you have a relative who lives in that state. They see what you shared, maybe they'll share. It's just a ripple effect.
It really is, and that's why we appreciate everything that every one of our followers and supporters does when they do comment, and share. With Facebook, the more engagement a post has, the more people it reaches. So we appreciate every single one of those comments and likes and shares, because that gets us one step closer to reaching the right person. And one of these days we want to have Katie in here or another family and be able to say that it was this Facebook Live, or it was this Project Cold Case segment on Action News Jax, or it was the spotlight on our website, or it was the podcast. We want to know that we're reaching the people, and that and we know as long as we keep doing these, it will happen.
Absolutely.
We just there's so many of them out there. It's finding the right case at the right time and reaching the right person, and a lot of it is out of our hands. We can just get the information together and put it out there, and hopefully the planets align and we get a smile from up above, and and somebody comes forward.
There's so much information in the podcast, so if you do have time to check it out, it's on actionnewsjax.com. You just look for the cold case section of the website, and you'll find it there. They're all listed.
They're listed, and I listened to it this morning just to refresh, and I love them, because you have to edit a lot of information down for that story.
Right, for TV we have a certain amount of time, but the podcast is nice. You can put everything.
Everything's in there. That story, you interviewed me, you interviewed Katie, you interviewed Detective Reeves, you went to the scene.
It's so much in there that I wish I could put on TV.
Right,
We just don't have the
it's
time.
just impossible to cram all of that onto a TV segment. But the information is there in a podcast,
and it's readily available. You just have to click it, listen to it, share it, and hopefully it'll jog people's memories.
Yeah,
who live there.
And even if it's not a case where you don't have information, again, you can share it. But listen to Katie's story. Listen to what she's gone through.
Least, listen to her.
Listen to what she's done. If you're one of these true crime fiends, the detective gives some great information and great detail in the podcast. My segment is really talking about Katie and my relationship and how we got to know each other, and what I've been able to do on the advocacy side. But
which is crucial, because thanks to you we were able to connect with Katie. So that's the beauty of partnershis.
It is. We've done some really good segments, and we're going to do some really good ones moving forward. So as long as Action News Jax will keep will keep letting us do it, we're going to do it.
We will continue.
And
if you know of a cold case, and just so you know, because a lot of people reach out to us saying, can you put my loved one's cold case on there? We do go through a process. We vet them. We go through JSO to see if this is something that they have enough information on, and then we go from there.
Yeah, but we do take those. We got an email from Paige Kelton at your station the other day on a case that I've reached out to.
Yes.
We
do look into them for sure.
We do, and that one, that was another one that when I was at Compassionate Families, we did have contact with that family. My memory is that that victim's sister moved to either Washington or Oregon, like all the way across the country, and we lost contact with her at that point. But I have reached out to JSO to kind of see if they still have contact with them, and if that's somebody, because that particular one was not a family member that reached out. Believe it or not, it was this victim was their realtor, and it helped them buy a house or sell a house, or buy one and sell one, and so they really it had always impacted them. They weren't related to her, but they were deeply impacted by her murder. and they reached out, and we do want the family's involvement. So while we welcome anybody with cases to reach out to us, it's important that the family know that we're doing this.
And the reasoning behind that is that nobody can tell your family's story better than you.
Right.
You know, I'm sort of like a middle person to help tell the story, but really, nobody can do it better than you.
Yeah, those words are powerful, and you know, and you hope that if somebody has information and they're able to look and see the impact that this loss has had, and see that emotion, that might help them make the right decision. So. Well, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you for having me. I love doing these.
Yeah, this has been a good time. We're gonna we'll do another one next month. We'll come up with another story that we've already done. Keep an eye on Action News Jax for the next Project OK segment, which I'm sure we'll be working on soon, and try to get some more interviews and families to talk to you and share their story. Visit our website, projectcoldcase.org. Our Facebook page, you obviously know if you're watching this, be sure to like that and share these stories.
Just hit share. That's all you got to do.
Just hit share. Simple stuff, and could really help. I mean, you could literally solve a murder by hitting the share button.
That'd be so amazing.
Yeah, that would be great. So, but thanks for joining us again, Lorena. Thank again.
You.
Look forward to having you back soon, and we'll be back next week with another Facebook Live episode.